right, so welcome back and thanks for staying with us. This is 20 by 20 on TV3, and today my guest is Mr. Tsatsu Tsikata. So let's just stay with the, ITLOS ruling. You could see one thing, started under the previous administration and continued even into this administration at a point where, the former Attorney General and the current Attorney General going to represent us. What lessons can we learn from that? Very important lessons. And let me say that it actually started even earlier under President Mills, because it was under President Mills where when we were able to establish, the beginnings of the legal work, and we brought on board people like Professor Kwame Mfojo from Australia, Professor Martin Chamenyi. They were brought on board to begin to provide some advice because they are specialists in this area of maritime law. And then when the decision under President Mahama, when the actual decision, because it was under President Mills, you remember that Côte d'Ivoire first started issuing the threatening letters to companies and so on. So of course the president had to start, establishing our legal basis for whatever position we take. And I think that led very well to the construction of a legal team when people like Tsikata and others were brought together, and the Attorney General at the time, Marietta Buopong, assembled a whole team, not just of lawyers, by the way, but also the technical people like some of the GMPC personnel, Thomas Menu, and by then Nana Safwaje was in the private sector, and he was also brought on board, the mapping experts in GMPC, as well as the international mapping experts, and an international legal team, lawyers from the US, lawyers from the UK. But I think that in the last stages, it was indeed very good for Ghana that the change of government in January did not have any sort of negative effect on the posture that we had before the tribunal, because it would have been very detrimental if suddenly Ghana was trying to sing a different tune. And I think what it tells us clearly is that as a country, if we put our best foot forward, no matter who is in power, that benefits the country as a whole. And our best foot forward is often found in combining the human resources that we have, irrespective of political party affiliation. And I'm a great believer in that. When I used to be running GMPC, I had some very good technical people. And sometimes people would whisper to me, this person is from this party or that party. I would say, so what? Because whatever his party affiliation, if he could do the job that he was hired to do, I was happy with that. And so for me, this continuity that occurred after January this year has been really quite resounding for the benefit of the country. I think also, as I said once on your discussion program, that my most beautiful and memorable images of Ghana's victory at ITLOS have to do with what happened in that February hearing, when you had former Attorney General Marietta more or less hand the baton over to our current Attorney General, Gloria, and I am glad to say they were both former students of mine. And it was such a beautiful image for me of what we can do as a country, just, across party lines.
Let's still stay with issues of politics, political nature, but this time still in the courts, because in 2013, the famous election petition, and you were the lead counsel for the NDC. What were some of the key moments in that trial for you?
I think that the first key moment, of course, had to do with the NDC's entry into the trial as one of the respondents, because, as you know, the petition was brought against John Dramani Mahama and the Electoral Commission. So it was an attempt to project two individuals, or rather three, on the petitioner side, Nana Addo Akufo-Addo, Dr. Bawumia Jacob Bilamte on the one side as petitioners, and then John Dramani Mahama as an individual person, and there was a challenge to his legitimacy. And so on the face of it, it would have required the president, who we believe was legally, lawfully elected, to spend a lot of time basically trying to defend himself as an individual. But we found it necessary to introduce the NDC as a party which had an interest, which had a stake in the matter. And of course, that was resisted, as you know, by the petitioners. They didn't want the NDC to be joined as a party. But we succeeded in convincing the majority of the judges, 6 against 3, as to the importance of the NDC entering into the petition and the proceedings generally. I think that one of the most important elements in that trial was when we had the judges agree to have an independent referee to examine the documents that had been submitted by the petitioners in support of their petition. Because, you know, there were a lot of documents. There were like 13,000 and so many hundreds of documents submitted. And we were increasingly trying to demonstrate, one, that those 13,000 documents often had duplications, triplications. The same document was repeated many times under different categories, and so there was a lot of double counting and so on. We're trying to show that. And we were making progress. Sometimes we had somebody like Dr. Baumia as a witness saying that, okay, they are now deleting 700 of the polling stations in respect of which they had originally brought the petition. They are deleting another, 70 and so on and so forth. So progressively we saw we were making progress. However, we thought it important for there to be an independent verification of exactly what they had put in evidence, because it was our case that their presentation of evidence was very weak. It was a factually empty petition, as I insisted in my closing address. So having that count taken was really very critical for us. And that count exactly exposed what we were insisting on.
Okay. But talking about Dr. Baumia, why did you cross-examine him for that long?
Because if a witness is trying to speak to 13,000 and so many hundred documents, and you're trying to show, even if it's a minute a document, where you're trying to show that these documents have been repeated many times, these documents don't lead to the conclusions that he's reaching, even if it's a minute for 13,000 documents, you can imagine. So I really don't have any apologies for the length of my cross-examination. I think it was necessary to expose, in some cases, the plain falsehood of the allegations that were being made, but most importantly, it was necessary to protect the right to vote of the millions of Ghanaian citizens whose votes were being sought to be annulled. There were votes of some 5 million people that were being sought to be annulled. So in order to protect the votes of Ghanaian citizens, it was absolutely essential to cross-examine in order to expose what we recognized was an unjustified basis for the allegations. And I'll just give you again a further illustration. Sure. Dr. Baumia said repeatedly, in his cross-examination, that the number of polling stations that were covered by the various allegations that were made were 11,842. 11,842. That's a lot of polling stations. And he wanted votes in these polling stations annulled. Now, the count of the independent referee showed that all these 13,000 and more documents that were filed, you could identify 8,675 unique polling stations from all these 13,000 documents. 1,000 and something were not even legible, So basically, 8,675 were what we're dealing with. We then went on to show that even in this 8,675 polling stations, much of the evidence that Dr. Bawumia was giving in relation to them could not really be countenanced. When we go through the affidavit and the things that Dr. Bawumia was relating to the different heads, we were able to show clearly, and we showed this, very definitively, we were able to show clearly that some of these 8,675 polling station pink sheets were actually not correlated to any of the allegations that they were making under the different heads, which means that in terms of evidence, they were completely worthless. Okay. And so we showed clearly that they had not they had not successfully discharged the burden of providing evidence such as could convince a court.
But let me just find this from you, Okay, so let's move on. I'm still staying with issues of, the court. And I want us to talk about, your trial and sentencing, based on what we know now. Of course, the appeals court has made it all of us aware that that shouldn't have happened. But based on what happened in the past, now, do you think that Ghana's judiciary is sufficiently immune from the influence of the executive arm of government, particularly the president?
In my case, obviously, it was not immune from the executive arm of government. I went to court on a day when the judge had not indicated that she was going to give judgment. She had not sat in court for 1.5 years. She was waiting for a decision of the Supreme Court in respect of whether the IFC could be subpoenaed to give evidence on my behalf. And I go to court, at her instance, one morning, 8 a.m., she had demanded we be in court. My lawyer had written to say he was having to travel and so on. And all that is ignored in favor of a judgment. Now, at the court, the police were there. They knew already that there was going to be a judgment. The whole court was surrounded by police. The Attorney General, who had not been in court for 1.5 years, he showed up, and he and his team obviously knew that there was going to be a judgment. So I was the stranger in Jerusalem. Without my counsel, I was accompanied that day, as most of the days when I was in court, by my good friend Martin Newman, the former chief of staff to President Mills. And in fact, I had driven him to court that morning. And so I ended up having to give him my keys so that he'd find somebody to drive the car back home. But all that was clearly orchestrated by the executive. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So that's a rather stark illustration of the way that these things get orchestrated. I don't wish it on anybody, and I'm pleased that somebody like President Mills didn't follow in that sort of tradition just to try to go after people, that were supposedly political opponents and so on. But it happened, and I think hopefully lessons can be learned from it. For me personally, I have to say that even though it may have been so unexpected and so on, it really did not, it did not lead to any bitter feelings in me. I use that period, I think, and my wife and I both reflect on it. We use that period for a certain spiritual strengthening.
Okay. Tell me more about that and the experience in, prison.
The spiritual strengthening was because we could see that we would come out of it and we would be stronger by God's grace. On the first Sunday in Soham prison, I went to the United Church, and a preacher came from Asamankesi, Pastor Jones Owusu-Eje. He came to preach a sermon. I don't think he expected that I would be in his congregation, so I don't believe that he prepared the sermon just for me. But he had two texts, Genesis 50:20 Joseph saying to his brethren, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And Romans 8:18, which says something like that, for our present sufferings are nothing compared with the glory that will be revealed in us. Some things to that effect. These were his two texts. And he preached a powerful sermon about Joseph's experience and about the fact that God has the master plan in our lives.
Okay.
And it was like that message was for me. Before he actually preached a sermon, there was a lady who came to minister in song. And before she sang, she said, you are in the right place at the right time.
How did you feel when you heard that?
I was touched. I was touched beyond measure because it was indeed true. I was in the right place at the right time.
Being in prison?
Yes, because, the first day I was in prison, I could hear the birds sing outside the prison cell. I could see the hills, I will lift up my eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. So I was really quite excited spiritually. It might seem very strange to say that. I was excited spiritually at that experience. And I think that the sheer support of my wife, my family, and the lengths to which they went. My wife didn't want me to have to eat food in the prison. She cooked every day and personally brought food to me in prison. And that, in a sense, was part of the saving grace when I had my asthmatic attack. The night of November 15th, I could easily have died, But on the Sunday morning when she came to deliver food to me, she found out I had been sent to Nsom Hospital, where there really wasn't much they could do. There was no oxygen in the oxygen tanks, and they really didn't have the medication to take care of me. And in the end, it was my wife who had to arrange an ambulance that came from Koforidua to take me first to 37 Military Hospital and then eventually to the Kolebu Cardiothoracic Center, the intensive care unit. And all through this, I had a quiet confidence that God had other plans for me. And so I was not, it was difficult. The asthma attack is the worst attack I've had in my life as an asthmatic. I've been asthmatic since I was 4 or 5. But I had the confidence, and I think that in the end, I think God indeed proved that all this was for good.
The first time you were told that you'd been granted pardon by President Kufuor, how did you feel?
I felt that was adding insult to injury.
Why?
Because I knew the extent to which he had gone as president to get me into that situation. I knew that he, in fact, it was a kind of Freudian slip that the first summons that I received was issued in the name of the president. You remember that saga? It was issued, but it was a kind of a Freudian slip. So I thought that after that, at a time when he knew that I had appealed, I appealed the very day that I was sentenced. My appeal was pending, I had a bail application pending, and for him to say that he was granting me a pardon, I really thought that was adding insult to injury. But, all I did was to write a letter saying that I was rejecting the pardon. I didn't believe it was in good faith. And that was that.
Let me just take you back to the election petition finally on this bit, because we told some of the judges on the panel were your students. How true is that?
Yes, that is true. I was honored to have taught a number of the judges. As I recall, Justice Jones Doche was my student, as was Justice Ansa, Justice Badegbe, Justice Bafuboni, and also Justice Eniniebo. Yes.
How did it feel,
Well,
argue in front of your students?
No. They were. I said they were.
They were.
In the
they
past.
were your students, but of
and
course.
so by the time they become judges, they were in a different league. So of course I had to appear before them as judges of the Supreme Court of Ghana.
Was there any point in time where you had to, make a conscious effort, to give
of
them
course.
that respect that is due them because you'd appeared before
I
them?
mean, of course, you know, I've been in legal practice for some 40 years, and you know, when you appear in court, you know, the judge is the judge. You have to show the respect that is due to the judge. So I really didn't have any difficulty about that, except that, you know, sometimes when a judge, and not just in the Supreme Court, but sometimes when you go to court and a judge says something that you really violently disagree with, and you believe that you have the law on your side, it can be tempting to kind of, you know, put on a certain attitude of, you know, the teacher or whatever. But I did make a conscious effort to avoid that.
So there was a conscious effort, you know, at a point in time.
Well,
you know,
I can't deny that.
Yeah.
I can't deny that. I mean, look, I think really in any trial like that, lawyers often find themselves in a situation where they cannot understand certain positions that some of the judges are taking. I mean, or indeed some of the opposite counsel are taking, because pretty much all the counsel on the other side were also my students.
Okay.
You know, or students of my students. You know, so yes, sometimes there was a difficulty in understanding how, you know, they could take certain positions. You know, but
Okay.
I think at the end of the day, you had to, you know, express the respect that professionals have to express to each other as best as you can, and especially for the judges to, you know, show them the respect due to their position. I mean, sometimes during informal chats in chambers and so on, yes, they would be remembering their days as my students or whatever, just out of banter, but that's just in an informal context. But once they sat as judges of the Supreme Court, they had to be respected as such.
Okay, but you know, let's as we get close to wrapping up, what's your assessment of Ghana's 60 years journey of self-rule?
I think it's very much work in progress. I think that an important area where we really need to pay more attention is how to get the benefits of our natural resources. When you consider Ghana has been a gold producing country from before independence for a century, Ashanti goldfields and so on, and you recognize what little value the country has got from a resource as important as gold. That resource has built other continents, you know, it's built other nations and riches for them. But for Ghana, it is still very limited in terms of what we've derived. And I think that is why I said earlier that in terms of our oil and gas resources, we are the beginning, but we have the chance to make better, you know, use of those resources and also to achieve better value for us as a country from those resources. So I think that's an area where I would find as somewhat wanting in the way we have really exercised, you know, the control over resources. You know, the United Nations had this convention on sovereignty over natural resources, which, you know, is about nations having the sovereign control over their resources for the benefit of their people.
Okay, so let's get to your son, Manifest.
Yes, he's a great musician.
Yes, where did he get that talent from? From you?
His grandfather is a musicologist of international repute, Professor Nketia.
Okay.
So I think that really answers your question. It wasn't from me, I have to say. I don't have those kinds of creative. I think my creativity is in the area of the legal profession.
You wish you had that sort of creativity?
Yes, I wish I had it, because I do enjoy music, including his music. And I enjoy gospel music a lot. And I sometimes wish that I could have that kind of creative capacity. But I think it's good enough that I enjoy what other people create.
Okay.
And it has also helped me through many situations. You asked about my time in prison and so on. You know, music was very much on my heart, on my mind during that period, you know, gospel music. And you know, my wife sings in our and she used to sing a lot more in our church song group. So very often, I could literally hear her voice, you know, singing as I was in my prison cell. And that itself was a good enough inspiration for me in that time. That's why I told you that it was spiritually a very strengthening period, but in spite of what other people may have wished.
Coming to Manifest, which of her songs is your favorite?
Maka.
Why Maka?
I think we'll have a conversation about Manifest music another time.
No, but I'm just, I mean, a little bit interested in that.
No, he's a fantastic lyricist. I mean, he uses words, whether in English or in Twi, in a way that is very poetic, and he puts together important thoughts sometimes in a very light-hearted manner. And I think that I find quite encouraging.
All right, so Mr. Tsikata, what are your wishes for TV3?
I'm glad I've had a chance to be part of your 20th anniversary celebration. And I would say that my wishes for TV3 are, one, that you may strengthen your capacity to educate Ghanaians about events in our country. You may strengthen your ability to deepen our national commitment to our future as a nation. You know, I think it's important that as a country, as citizens of Ghana, we really deepen our commitment to this country. And I hope that in the years ahead, TV3 can play a key role in that deepening of our commitment, and therefore in the attainment of the development agenda of our people. So your role as a news institution is not just to cover sort of big people, big politicians, big presidents, and so on. You know, your role is to reflect the experience of the people of the country, the people at a very basic level, their experience and their aspirations. And I can only wish you the best as you try to pursue this cause in the years ahead. I hope I'm there for your 50th anniversary.
Mr. Tsikata, thank you very much. We're very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Folks, I have learnt a lot, and I believe you've learnt a lot too. That's all from us today on 20 by 20 with me, Winston Amwa. You heard from Mr. Tsatsu Tsikata, one of Ghana's best lawyers. From all of us here in the team, thank you very much, and do have a lovely weekend.